All right, so now we're going to talk about the IELTS listening general strategies. Now, the first thing is when you go to the IELTS exam, in the very beginning, there will be audio telling you about the instructions for the exam. This audio will take about 2 minutes and 45 seconds. So remember that there's a 2-minute, 45-second instruction audio. Now, for the first 45 seconds, you cannot turn over your test papers. But after 45 seconds, the audio will tell you to turn over your papers and turn to section 1. During this time, do not turn to section 1. Instead, turn to section 3, because section 3 and section 4 of the listening are the most difficult. Now, you're going to have about 1.5 minutes of instruction time before the part 1 listening begins. During this 1.5 minutes of the instructions, you should look at the section 3 and section 4 questions of the listening. This will give you a great chance to review these difficult sections before you get to them later in the listening. So, remember,
this recording is copyrighted by
use
One Solutions Inc.
the
and World
1.5 minute
You will hear several different recordings
instruction time.
on what you hear. There will be time given to read the instructions and questions.
To review
to check your work.
the
Recordings will be played.
difficult
The test is made up of 4 sections. At
section
the end of the test, you will have 10 minutes to
3 and 4 of the listening.
Now turn to section 1. Listening section 1. You will hear a conversation between...
Now again, in this 1.5 minutes, turn to section 3 and 4, try to read all of the questions, and there are a couple of steps that you can take to help improve your mark. Many students, when they use this 1.5 minutes of the instructions to review section 3 and section 4 of the listening, can usually improve their listening mark by about half or even 1 whole mark. So it's an excellent way to get a better score in the listening section. So a good question here is, what should you do during the 1.5 minutes of the instructions while you're reviewing section 3 and section 4? So I'm going to tell you about that.
In what town will you be playing? Chester. But I'd be willing to travel to Liverpool if I had to.
The man says he wants to play in Chester, so B has been indicated for you. Now we shall begin. You should answer the questions as you listen, because you will not hear the recording a second time.
Listening instruction time.
Listen carefully and answer questions 1 to 5.
So the first step that you should do while you're looking at section 3 and 4 and reading the information is try to visualize, try to see the information, try to create a picture in your mind looking at the question. So what is the topic of the listening for section 3? What is the topic of the listening for section 4? In our example, we are looking at section 3, and in this example, the conversation is between 3 students who are working on a project. So as you look at the questions, you should try to visualize these 3 students, try to be one of those students, and try to see the project that you're working on. So the first step is visualize the listening based on the questions. And of course, try to see this as clearly as possible. Now, the second step. So when you're doing the listening section of the IELTS, the questions are always a paraphrase of what the speakers are saying. So what that means is you will see the questions in one way, and then you're going to hear the audio say the answer in a different way. So for example, if the question says, what day is the discussion taking place, then maybe in the audio you're going to hear something like, this talk is happening on a certain day of the week. So again, what you need to do when you're looking at the questions in the listening section is you should try to paraphrase these questions. And this is excellent practice for the listening section. So paraphrase the listening section questions as you read them. Now, of course, during the exam, you don't really have enough time to write down the paraphrase, so write down synonyms for the words that you see. But you should practice this at home before you do the IELTS exam, and during that time, before you do a listening, try to write down a paraphrase for each question before you do the listening. During the exam, you're going to have to try to paraphrase the information and the questions in your mind. Especially pay attention to verbs and subjects and adjectives. So let's look at the section 3 and section 4 example, and let's try to paraphrase these questions, and hopefully this will help us a lot while we're doing the listening, and it will help us solve the questions, because you should hear some of these words that you're thinking about during the audio. Now, do remember that once you are finished looking at section 3 and section 4, when the audio gives you the example for part 1 or for section 1, then you should turn back to section 1 and look at the questions before the speaker or the speakers start to give the conversation and give you these answers. So again, remember to return to section 1 during the end of the example after the instructions. So return to section 1 of the listening at the end of the example. Now again, remember section 1 is usually a general topic, buying insurance or registering for school. So these topics are quite a bit easier than section 2, 3, and 4. You don't really need too much review time to get a good score on these, but do try to skim read them quickly as the audio starts at the end of the example during the instructions. So again, pay close attention to the timing. Don't just stare at the test paper during the instructions, but have a look at sections 3, have a look at sections 4, and give yourself a second chance to review those before you reach those sections. Alright, so these examples that we're using are taken from www.aehelp.com. To get more practice with the listening section and for a lot of listening exercises, please visit our page and join the full IELTS course.